So we've got people joining, so I'll just give it another minute or so. Right, I'm going to make a start and then others can join in when they join in. Good afternoon. Very warm welcome to you. I'm Richard Freeman, Chief Exec of Always Possible. We help design projects that look at society transformation, and we provide support to people, building businesses and organisations in challenging times as well. I'm delighted to be bringing this together this session in my role as chair of one of the work strands on the Brighton Cultural Framework, specifically looking at the city's support for freelancers and creative networks. This session today is delivered in partnership with the Brighton Arts and Cultural Commission and is funded by Brighton Hove City Council. So thank you very much to them for making this happen. A little bit of housekeeping first. It really is fantastic to see so many of you. We've got 24 and counting. We're expecting up to about 30, 35 people. So there's too many of you to do intros. So what you'll see in the chat bar is people giving a little summary of who they are, where they're from, what they're about, any contact details if they're willing to share that. So do make sure that if you want to, you add yourself to that as well. We're keeping you muted for now. It's not because we don't want to hear your lovely voices. There'll be plenty of chance to do that. It's just to minimize any background noise. But if you've got something that you're burning to say, and we'll have an open discussion later, please raise your hand or use the sort of digital hand raising button that's on there somewhere, and myself or my colleague Vicky will ensure that you get a chance to talk. So this session is being recorded so that others who can't attend today can kind of take part later on. If there is an issue with you appearing on the recording, or you're unhappy with something that you've said and don't want it to be shared, just let me or Vicky know via the kind of chat bar. Send us a private message and we'll make sure that we take you out of it in terms of post-production. Other housekeeping, obviously if a fire alarm goes off, it's in your house, so you better deal with it, and toilets are wherever your toilets are, so I can't help you with that, any more information on that. So the aim of this session is to have a lively, informal and friendly conversation about practical action. There are loads and loads of conversations happening at the moment, nationally, locally, regionally, about the impact of COVID-19 on the creative industries and what a bold and inclusive recovery might look like. It's fair to say there aren't any concrete answers at the moment, not always the firm reassurances from government that we'd like, and many people are genuinely desperately worried about the future of their business and livelihood. So those things are happening, and this is in some part a response to that. But this conversation, I mean, let's pretend the crisis isn't here. This conversation should and could be happening anyway, and doesn't happen enough. There's no shortage of wisdom, skill and compassion in the local creative sector. This is an opportunity for us to bring all of that together and to look at how we can pool the resources that we've got. Every sector is trying to be creative at the moment, from hospitality to aviation and hairdressing, looking at how they might need to rethink the way they work. But arts, culture, heritage, digital and media industries know how best to be creative and resourceful and community focused. We know it is the sector that can lead others, and the UK is a country that can lead the way too, with a rich and deep-rooted creative spine, and Brighton Hove is a city to lead within the UK. Our large creative life may be a bit of an economic red flag at the moment, but it's what makes us us, and is the thing that will bring the city bouncing back very soon. So this session is about living that creativity through action. Hundreds of creative people have been offering help to others over the past few weeks, and others have been brilliant at asking for help when needed as well. Both are really important. No one is good at everything, no one has everything at hand. So when we pool our resources and assets, skills and resources, we can start to bridge the gaps and build a collective strength. There's not a single organisation or individual in the sector that's not been negatively affected at the moment. At best, inconvenience of cancelled events, but at worst, health being impacted by this horrid disease, or 100% loss of income. We know that that is a reality for some. So when we look at what you can offer, and we will talk about what you can offer as well as what you need, please don't feel pressured into giving time or energy that you don't have, or to offer more than you can afford to. That's not what this is about. But there might be something small that you're already doing that you can share, or something that you have that others may be able to work with you on. You may have some staff, furloughed staff, might have expertise that can be volunteered for others. Networks and contacts that you have access to might be a route for helping people who don't have access to that with fundraising, marketing or legal issues. You might have some space that you can't currently use for the large crowds that was intended for, but could be valuable for a socially distanced promo photo shoot or something like that. That's what we'll explore. So over the next hour or so, we're going to explore what the collected assets are in our community. We'll have a chance to identify what specific things are needed, and the chances are if you need something, so does somebody else. So what we want to try and do is avoid duplication, and we'll discuss what we have to share and use between us. There are lots of you, and would like as many of you to have a chance to have a chat with the wider group as possible. So when you do get to speak later, keep it as concise as you can. Do use the chat bar. We can, be as long as you like in that. And there will be follow-up opportunities from this at the cultureinourcity.com website. You'll see at the bottom of the screen there, the Twitter at Creative Brighton and the Culture in Our City website is where all of this stuff will be collated and the conversation continued. So anything that we discussed today and comes out of this, we will summarise and publish on that site and ensure that you get connected to the right people. Anyway, okay, enough of me for now, which is a relief. Before I introduce a few invited guests to kick off the conversation, we are going to do a little pop-up poll. We want to get a flavour of where you're at and where your thinking is at the moment. So we're going to do a little poll now, and then at the end of the session. So Vicky there has put a question up. You should be able to see it on your screen. It says, based on your current situation, including your tech, content, personal situation, environment, how ready do you feel to radically collaborate and pool your resources? How are you feeling at the moment? Do you feel, okay, I'm more stable than I was a few weeks ago, I've got something to give, I'm ready for this? Or actually, do you feel that the future's so uncertain that that's actually quite a big ask at the moment? There's no right or wrong answer, it just gives us a sense. We're just testing sort of confidence and mood at the moment. So whilst you're completing that, I'm going to introduce 4 creative industry leaders from the city that I've invited along to give a quick overview of what they have sort of needed most at the moment, but crucially what they might have to offer that could be a lifeline to some of you joining in. So a huge thank you to Liz Whitehead, who is usually director of Fabrica, but currently furloughed there. So she's here in her capacity as vice chair of the Arts and Creative Industries Commission. We'll also hear from Don Bailey, creative director at digital design company Baxter and Bailey. We'll have Branwen Lorigan, who is the arts development manager at Brighton Hove City Council, and Andrew Comben, chief executive of Brighton Dome, Brighton Festival, and the chair of the Creative Industries Commission. So thank you to all of them. So Liz, can we kick off with you first, please?
Sure. Thanks, Richard. I guess my background as well is in visual arts. So I've been thinking about what the visual arts in general might be able to offer, particularly the venues that receive regular public funding from the Arts Council, because I think whilst everybody's financially and existentially challenged by this crisis, I think those of us fortunate enough to be receiving public funding are at least able to take advantage of furlough, and that is a resource potentially which can be drawn on. I think the other thing that particularly visual arts spaces have, including Fabrica, is space. So whilst we can't open to the public, we are planning and are running a programme that's kind of digitally located, and there will be some artworks installed in the space, but potentially there's still an opportunity to turn that space over to other use, which could be anything from socially distanced meeting space for quite small groups. I mean, at the moment you can meet with 6 or 5 other people from different households, but if that goes up, that could be really great for groups that are self-organised, that are looking for a space to use in order to carry on meeting. I'm thinking of things like peer critique groups or artist-led initiatives that just may need that space. There's also potential maybe for later on in the year, because a lot of our venue hire bookings have dropped out. If that continues to happen in the autumn, then there's potentially room for doing more of of projects that we call making space, which is kind of quite informal, very short artist residencies, where artists propose to use the space for about 4 days to try out a new idea. I mean, that it's really open. And there has been a demand for that. I mean, we select for that, but we could certainly look at perhaps facilitating much more of those opportunities, whilst we haven't got any hires on in space. I mean, I think also the spaces are really, it could be used for hosting events which are streamed as well. You know, it could be quite an interesting space to do something like that in, rather than a conventional kind of office space, or the scenarios like we've got at the moment, which are where people are streaming content in really quite small domestic spaces. It could also potentially be used for kind of short-term tabletop workspace for freelancers. If you can't access your workspace for some reason, then the space at Fabrica is, I mean, everything's got the caveat of being safe and being able to be socially distanced and us being able to manage it, but parts of the building could be used for some of that kind of or repurposed in that way. And I suspect those opportunities may also be possible with other visual art spaces in the city, where gallery spaces are available, because there's no public access obviously to those at the moment. I think also in terms of expertise that we could offer, the kind of obvious ones are insight around artistic programming, especially site-specific commissioning, developing new work with the attention to visitor experience, audience development expertise, digital marketing, artist creative development, especially within a gallery context, project fundraising, and working with cultural volunteers and volunteering. There's obviously more other transferable skills as well, such as kind of communications, project management, financial management. And we could, if there was an interest or a demand, look at kind of portioning up access to that expertise with furloughed staff. So it would be free, or potentially through to freelancers who we've worked with and can vouch for, who would need to be paid as maybe one-to-one slots of an hour or an hour and a half, something like that. So that's Fabrica's offer, but I'm sure if we started doing something, then we could also talk to some of our peers in the city who I know are probably doing stuff informally anyway. I think the kind of challenge for us is how that might be coordinated. You know, is there a kind of digital platform that needs to, where people, you know, I need to offer something as a kind of discrete package, and you know, people effectively buy it or claim it. That could be a really kind of efficient way of doing it, and very open. So you know, I think without that, it's you know, we're left with informal access, usually through people who already have either got the confidence or the contacts to access it. So I think, you know, there is an opportunity there to really sort of broaden out the access to it. I mean, in terms of what we need, we quite a lot of our staff are going to be, as the furlough arrangements change, they're going to be working remotely, and we don't currently have enough laptops, for instance, for them all to work at home, and the price of laptops has rocketed since homework's become essential. So we've got a budget, but it's probably not enough to buy new equipment. So if anybody knows anybody out there who's got laptops that they want to sell that just do basic word processing, I'd be really interested to hear.
Thank you, Liz. Fantastic. I mean, a really good range of examples of things that an organisation like Fabrica can offer. A good challenge there set in terms of access and ensuring that everybody is aware of what's available, not just those that are already connected, and a very simple ask. Thank you, Liz. That's fantastic. I'm going to bring in Don Bailey now from Baxter and Bailey, kind of representing the digital sector on this initial bit today. How are you, Don?
Very well, thanks. Hi, everyone. Lots of people that I don't recognise, which is lovely to see. I thought I'd just briefly explain who I am. So my name's Don Bailey. I'm a strategic director at a brand design consultancy called Baxter and Bailey, and so I'm here really kind of representing, I guess, the kind of more the creative industries and design side of things, which I hope will be of interest, if not directly relevant. I certainly hope some of the things I've got to say will be useful. And I thought I'd start by just talking about information anxiety. I mean, I had information anxiety before all of this, and now I've got perhaps even more so. There's just an abundance, isn't there, of information and things potentially to look at and read and become involved with. And so it's been quite difficult, I think, to try and navigate that. So I thought I'd start by just sharing some of the things that I found useful. Some of them may be directly relevant to you, but if not, there may be things a little like it, closer to home than you might think. The first is Slack channels. I don't know whether people are familiar or using this particular kind of form of technology. It's really built to help teams communicate quite effectively. But there's a really good one that's been established for agency founders, so sort of design agency founders specifically. And I don't know if there are these kind of things available for artists and in the arts community, but if you get onto a good one, it's really brilliant because it's kind of like a live peer-to-peer conversation about what people are dealing with and going through day to day, and lots of sharing happening. So I found that really useful. There's also another Slack channel by Andy Budd from Clearleft, which is a digital agency here in Brighton for design leaders. So that's another thing that people could look at if relevant. The Design Business Association, which is our trade body, has done a range of things from webinars to group conversations. But one of the things I've found very useful and interesting, I think it's a good idea, is a weekly coffee with the chief executive of that, a little bit like this forum actually. It tends to be a very open conversation, but I found that incredibly useful, if nothing else, just to tap into what other people are thinking about and going through on any given week, and helping kind of formulate my ideas and decisions about some of the things that I'm grappling with too. So that's the Design Business Association weekly coffee facilitated by the chief executive. And Whitehead Sussex has had some really interesting events, how to promote yourself as a freelancer, which I think is one that's up and coming. Yesterday they ran one about how to promote your business. So do have a look at Whitehead, because there's some really interesting virtual meetings and ongoing support for the digital sector. In terms of Platform 9, I'm sure people have perhaps come into contact with some of the events that they're running around, thinking about the events economy of the city or what next for the sector. Very much worthwhile tuning into that. And then the Culture in Our City website, which of course is why we're here today, and everything that's available through that. And then finally, I thought I'd mention the Creative Industries Federation and Creative England, which are now actually have become a merged organisation. Their comms and websites haven't quite caught up, but there's an abundance of brilliant information from both those websites, much of that content's duplicated. And they even introduced, for my information anxiety, a nice area on there called stress breaks, which is really quite interesting, mix of other things to do to perhaps distract you from the challenges of the day-to-day, including just opening up of the Science Museum's archive, which I've delved into, and it's really interesting. So take a look at that too. In terms of what Baxter and Bailey can offer, I guess it's limited in some ways, given that we're a relatively small company, but we're determined to find a kind of extra gear, if you like, and put ourselves out there as wanting to be part of finding a new way to connect with people and talk. And I'm fortunate in that the design industry is already quite open as a sector, as the arts sector is. But if you involve the creative industries at large, combined with the artist community, which I do, not everybody I think is there yet, I think we can have a different kind of dialogue going forward. And this is perhaps a great opportunity to begin that more in earnest. We've developed a series of 4 workshops. They're not workshops actually, they're more kind of sessions which run through the creative process, from creative brief through to ideas generation, development, and then execution. And we've done that in lockdown. So we have that content ready, and perhaps that's something that we could offer in terms of sharing that with those that it was relevant for. We can also offer peer-to-peer sounding board. So that could be in the form of a one-to-one or a smaller group around a particular issue. Anything from a business issue that you're grappling with, or financial advice in terms of sort of modelling your business going forward, all the way through to things that we do kind of core to our business, which is help articulate an idea and position it in the context of an audience, whether that's not-for-profit or private venture. So that's another way in which perhaps we could help. And to really just sort of begin to advocate for a more openness, I guess. And I'm interested to hear what other people have to say kind of in response to that, whether they think that's a good idea or what could be benefited from it. And then finally, just to sum up, what I'm really thinking about a lot for our business and the network that we work with, and hopefully for a bigger network after ongoing, is just how we work full stop. You know, how creative work is sort of conceived, developed and created in teams. And we're thinking about a potential more fundamental shake-up of the way in which we work, both organisationally and physically. So I thought I'll sort of finish with that, but hopefully there's some starting points for a broader talk on some of those points. So
Brilliant.
thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Don. That's great, and really important point there to start with about the information overload. There's an awful lot of noise out there. So those examples you gave of sort of trusted Slack channels and networks that have worked for you, that's really important. I think sharing the intelligence on the stuff that works is something that this as a group and networks in the city can do. And just to add to that, I think some of you may or may not be members of Brighton Chamber of Commerce, but their Slack channel I think has been particularly useful for those, and I've seen many creative industries and artists using it to get access to solicitors, lawyers, marketing advice, tax specialists, a lot of the professional industries and services that sometimes can be quite expensive to track down that key advice. There's a lot of free one-to-one sessions and support being offered that I personally don't feel that always the arts sector take up enough of and seek that out. So if you get a chance to check that out, then I would recommend that too. Thank you, Dom, that's brilliant. Branwen, I'm going to bring you in now. I know you've been ringing around colleagues in the council to pinpoint some specific offers. So do let us know how the local authority is responding at the moment.
Okay, so my name's Branwen and I'm part of the directorate which includes tourism, sports and culture. So I work really closely with my colleagues in tourism, sports and culture, and the culture is across the three, but obviously led by the arts development team, which includes myself and one other, and we both work part-time. And I think that the thing that people find most difficult from outside the council is how to navigate the council and how to find out what's going on and how they connect to it. And we built this website called Culture in Our City, which is undergoing a kind of a revamp, so to speak, to make it more available to people from who are now accessing it, and for it to be used as a platform of resources for everyone. So all the national portfolio organisations, we're trying to get all their information on there, freelancers, sole traders, and sort of make it a really good comprehensive resource space across the city for the sector. And also in the revamp of it, we're kind of putting a spin for new ideas and initiatives that people in the sector come up with and promoting those. And in terms of navigating the council, I hope to put up some sort of FAQs, which I thought I might get some information from during this roundtable about what people are finding really difficult. So obviously with some things that happen through the council, they have to be signed off by politicians. So reports are written, and then it goes to a specific committee, and then the politicians, the Green, the Labour and the Conservative, sign off, and then the officers, like myself, can then deliver. So things don't happen really, really quickly because of that process. So, for example, I was just saying when I first came on here that I've been ringing around colleagues from highways to tourism, to parks, to seafront, to see where they're at with the stages of reopening the city. And there are 4 groups. There's one for the city centre, one for the seafront, one for parks, and one for Hove. And city centre is being run by highways, seafront, obviously the seafront, and parks by parks, and Hove by highways. So I've sort of put an ask out there and said, look, if there are any opportunities for artists, creatives to be part of the reopening and any sort of commissions that come along, let me know, and they will go onto the Culture in Our City website and just let us know when there's something on the agenda where we can influence this. Another example is the economic development team have commissioned empty shops scheme for the city, for the centre of the city, And again, I've been in touch with them and said, well, it's not just shops, it's windows, and it's not always about products, it's about ideas and sort of kind of communicating with the audience. So could you please, they commissioned the bid, the Business Improvement District, to run this scheme. So again, just connecting with them to find out where they're at. They are still quite far down the line in terms of getting a sense of what's going to happen with the high street, basically. But even before lockdown, there were quite a few empty shops, so they are working with landlords to look at what's feasible there. So there's a sort of an inroad there through that scheme. I spoke to the Brighton Centre, which is obviously owned by the council and is probably one of the biggest venues in the city, indoor venues in the city, and to find out what they were doing. And they are looking at using it as a testing space for gigs or events. But obviously with all the guidelines of the current 2 metre distance that needs to be kept by people in place. So if the 2 metre distancing stays in place for a while, that will mean that the Brighton Centre will potentially be able to hold 230 people. But if it goes down to 1 metre, they could potentially hold 500. But then it has to have a feasibility study, all the sort of safety precautions, and then probably needs political sign-off through a committee once that study has been put in place. So I've said, well, what's the earliest it could potentially be used to test things out and to have sort of small events? And the answer was September, potentially. But then, as I think Liz was saying, there are bookings in October, November, December, and they have to honour those bookings. But they're usually tours. So once those, and if those bookings are cancelled, there may be gaps that the events sector and could populate, and there are currently gaps. So there's a lot of potential there, but nothing concrete to offer. But I think the Culture in Our City website, if everyone keeps going to that and uses it as a platform to put everything out as a central point, as well as their own websites, it's like people knowing what's happening and how to connect to it really quickly, and not feeling that they're being kept in the dark and they just don't know how to decipher things. So for example, the discretionary grant scheme, you know, a lot of people don't know if they're eligible or if they can access it, but that's coming out hopefully today. And so putting it on that website, people will be able to spread the word really quickly and work out if they're eligible for the discretionary grant scheme. Anything else? I found it really useful working in this way, because it takes a long time to get through things because of the layers that I've tried to describe at the council, but now things are happening much more quickly, which is really exciting. And also I've really enjoyed going on the different forums, and I feel like I'm talking and connecting to loads more people in one hit and really getting a sense of where people are at. So that's been a positive for me, having that connection.
Thank you, Branwen. Really valuable to get the insight there from the council perspective. And even if people sometimes find navigating the council frustrating, which I think everybody does at different times, I think everybody will agree that the effort that you and the team are putting in to try and make it clearer and to try and advocate for arts and culture is second to none. So I know that will be really appreciated. The discretionary grants fund mentioned there, that may or may not be available from today, will be the topic, hopefully, of another webinar next week, next Thursday at 11. We'll make sure you get the details, in which always possible we'll be working with the What's Next forum to support anybody looking to apply to that through the process and looking at some of the questions and some of the language to ensure that you can put your best possible case forward. And that grant really is aimed at those who have fallen through the cracks in terms of other government support. So that should be 11 o'clock next Thursday, and we'll make sure that anyone on this call gets details of that when available. Thank you again, Branwen. So Andrew, could I bring you in now to talk from the perspective of the Festival on the Dome?
Brilliant, thank you, Richard. Yeah, actually, just before that, I suppose building on some of what Dom and Branwen have been saying, I mean, around the collaboration that already exists in the city, and I'm sort of really delighted by the title of this, because I think collaboration is one thing, but radical collaboration is kind of an interesting one to toss around, and I'll be really interested to hear the discussion later, how we take real advantage, if there is any advantage in this moment, to build on what we already have. But I am really pleased by the work that the various networks across the city are doing, particularly Arts Creative Industries Commission alongside What Next and alongside EPIC, the Event Producers Committee. And those three networks working together feels really powerful and useful. What Next is, I think, especially useful and particularly useful right now. Louise Blackwell and Marina Norris are chairing that weekly brilliantly, and I think really bringing a new group of people together on a more regular basis, which I think is great. I also find the Young Vic What Next meeting really useful as well, and if anyone wants to sign up to that, you just have to sign up to the mailing list for it. I can post the address for it in the chat later on, but it's this morning's meeting had 283 people in it, and What Next at Young Vic used to be 30 people a week, and it felt, although it's designed to be inclusive, it felt quite exclusive in many ways, and people often didn't feel like they had permission to come in the room, and actually now that feels like a real change. So do tap into that. It means you have access to a national conversation as well as a local one. From the organisation's point of view, from Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival's point of view, I mean, many of the things that have already been said are ones that I would want to echo as well. Obviously, we are a larger organisation and really well resourced in that respect relative to many others, and I think it's absolutely our responsibility to be as generous with that as we possibly can, and share as much as we can, at the same time as like everyone facing the kind of existential crisis that we all are. So we've offered already finance, HR and IT support and consultations, advice and so on, and really want to reiterate that here. Please get in touch if you think any of our team can be useful in that respect. We've been helping independent artists with applications to emergency funds, often just in reading them through and advising, but sometimes in steering and guiding more directly as well. And similarly, our producers are really happy to help, as are our fundraisers. And I think we could use this moment too to build on the fundraising network that already exists across the city, through what was known as our Future City, now known as Future Creators, and that has been a really successful conversation between fundraisers about how best to strategically organise, and this feels like a moment where we need that even more, and we need more voices in the room. So that really, that kind of practical offer, I think, builds on or hopefully complements Liz's thoughts around Fabrica. Obviously, some of the conversation around Brighton Centre also applies to the Dome. I'm really aware that the Dome Concert Hall is fundamentally a performance space, and we obviously want to retain it as such. And we're in a kind of moment of stasis at the moment while we try and understand what advice might come around reopening. I think the next month or so is going to be key in that, because the DCMS task force and working group around events is going to be specifically focusing on advice around reopening. And so within the next 4 weeks or so, I would expect that we have at least a timeline and a sense of the practicalities around government advice around reopening. Where similar, as Branwen mentioned, the Brighton Centre and capacity, we would be massively reduced with social distancing. And if that were to be a long-term proposition, by which I mean 3, 6, 9 or 12 months, then I really want to work on how best a publicly owned asset like the Dome can be useful to its community. And we're talking to lots of different people about lots of different possibilities, from retaining its essence as a performance venue and how we might partner with other organisations across the city, or venues that have less capacity than ours but could use a smaller capacity, to social purpose and working with the voluntary sector and with small businesses. So I'm really keen to make that, in a sense, an open offer. It comes with a load of caveats, as Liz was saying earlier, and I would really invite suggestions, but expect a really practical conversation around what might or might not be possible in that. But if you picture the Dome and its foyer space and you feel you've got a great idea about how it might be used, I'd be really happy to hear from you. We have committed to, there's a national task force being set up for freelancers to represent the freelance voice in conversations and advocacy around support for the sector. And so Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival have committed to funding a freelancer on that task force, and that process is running at the moment. It was to have had a deadline of midday today. We extended it to midday on Monday, not because we haven't already had a huge number of applications. We have, but we were also really aware that that many freelancers, particularly freelancers of colour, simply weren't having the bandwidth over this last week to apply, and so we wanted to make sure that we were giving time for people to apply. Do have a look at that. It's a funded 1 day a week for the next 3 months to be part of that national task force, and I'd be really keen to see as many people apply for that as we can. I wonder if our pool of casual workers can be, and across many organisations in the city, whether a pool of casual workers could be shared. I'd be really keen to promote the skills of our casual workers if we're not able to employ them as much as we might otherwise be. There's a really brilliant team of technicians, of event coordinators, and so on. And Richard, you mentioned very early on the idea of sharing furloughed staff, and I'd also be keen to explore that. We have 168 permanent staff, and more than 85% of them are furloughed at the moment. I think there are opportunities coming out of this, around, particularly if government investment targets infrastructure and skills in the way that we're expecting might be the case. Can we think about the events infrastructure in the city? Can that be be invested in and shared across across many different organisations? Is there also a virtual infrastructure that we could think about that operates across the city in a more equitable fashion? And I suppose finally, I'd just be really interested in how this idea of radical collaboration, if that's what we're signing up to, is used as a moment to drive real change around both inclusion and sustainability. It feels if we're taking an opportunity and working in a different way, then those are two areas where we desperately need change, and we could use this moment to drive it forward.
Thank you, Andrew. Food for thought there, definitely in agreement with that. Okay, so now is the chance to open it out to everybody in the room. All I ask is that we keep it focused on possibilities and what can happen, that we think about that radical collaboration. What does that mean? How do we make that happen? And I've put a couple of prompt questions there. We're going to start with these three. So what is it that you need? What are your gaps? What can't you find that you want some help finding? You've heard some of the possible solutions to that from our four speakers, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. What we will come to in a moment is trying to respond directly to some of the things that you put out there. But let's do that. Let's open it up. So if you can raise your hand or make a little signal or something. Those of you who aren't using your cameras, maybe indicate in the chat room if you want to be brought in. But who would like to kick us off with an example of what it is that you would like to see more of in terms of support for your organisation or yourself? What a shy bunch. Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. We bring you in.
No problem. I'm in my house, so less shy. It's not real, is it real? So in terms of, so I run Cast Iron, which is a fringe theatre company in Brighton. We've also just created Ironclad Creatives, which is a community interest company looking to support early stage creatives who are from disadvantaged or underrepresented backgrounds. So I feel like it's a kind of what we would like to see is really this, but ongoing. So open doors to the council, open doors to MPOs, and just in terms of the gaps right now, I think certainly everything that's being talked about is amazing, and I just feel a slight sort of anxiety of, gosh, everybody's being so opening and so welcoming and so available. I just would love that to continue. So it's not about kind of what are the gaps now, but or what I can't find, because the Culture in Your City website is amazing. And all the support is amazing, but I would love some sort of I don't want to get like sad later when everyone gets really busy and really into their own amazing work that they're doing, that there isn't this connection. So I wonder if it is, I don't know, I don't really know what I'm asking it, so please don't all vanish when you all get really busy. I don't know.
I think that's a great ask, Michelle, if I'm honest. I think that's brilliant. Yeah, so it's not a specific piece of help, it's actually, let's embrace this culture change that's sort of happening right now, this space, this openness, this collaboration. I personally pledge to help my little bit of that, and I'm sure others do as well. But yes, we need to be kept accountable for that. But I think networks like the What Next forum is a really great place for that, and often has the MPOs and council represented, and it's an open group. Which I know earlier in the well, certainly last year, kind of shrunk because people weren't taking it up. They weren't attending, so it became a more hassle than it was worth to keep it going, I think. But now it has huge interest, so that feels like a good forum to not have to reinvent something, but to keep that going. But yeah, no, I think that's a really valid point. Anyone want to either pick up on Michelle's point or want to bring something else in terms of a need or a request or an idea that you have? Karen.
Hi everyone, it's great to see you all. Yeah, I mean, I've got a list as long as your arm, really. So it's like, where do I start, really? So there's one thing that was raised earlier, which Andrew said, which was about this kind of this infrastructure. So I was just in the What Next digital group with Michelle, and one of the things that that I've been doing is starting to work in schools. So just this whole massive project that I was doing cancelled, but I've still got this bit of money to do some work in schools. So the thing that I'm conscious of is, how do I kind of hook in? How can I hook into existing networks rather than just waste all of the money on trying to kind of engage teachers who are all over the place, kids in schools, which is all kind of, so I suppose there's some kind of, I would much rather do things in person, face to face and things, but actually there might be a point when I'm going to really have to embrace the digital. So I suppose I was kind of suggesting that maybe there's a platform, digital platform, where all these resources that are online can just, for schools in particular, can just go, one huge thing, sort of like, looks like your Zoom thing. You click on it and go, right, here's the one for, marine conservation in the living coast. Here's the one for this and that. So I suppose something that makes it easy for us to kind of find an audience, I guess, rather than literally kind of scouting around for ages and doing loads of repeated work, especially in this digital sphere. So yeah, I'll stop because I could go on for ages. So.
Well, you're welcome to carry on if you've got some other things, but I think that is a great point there. And often a digital platform seems to be what every individual project is trying to build or create. But what we are missing, or what we don't have, is that one place that people can go to and be guaranteed to find what they need to find. So whether that's maybe a future legacy for the Culture in Our City site, or whether that's something done through, Andrew mentioned the Our Future City Cultural Education Partnership that sits within the Dome, has just rebranded, I think today, launched its rebrand, Future Creators, which is very exciting, but they're doing lots of work around kind of digital platforms and connecting through that. So it may be that exists, Karen, and there's a way for you to be a part of that, but it's just not joined up. But that seems like a good conversation to accelerate.
Yeah, I think that there's, so I've only just discovered there are all these different bridge organisations, and I think the part of it is that you have to kind of like link into individual schools, and obviously when they're not, it's so unclear, and I suppose that's the whole point, isn't it? It's just, we had this huge thing, loads of schools, all that, but anyway.
Thank you. Schools find it frustrating as well, because they often have a really good idea of what they want, but can't quite find the organisation that they need, or they're getting lots of different offers that they can't necessarily respond to. So, but that's where the bridge organisations or the cultural education partnerships can come into their own. But perhaps as a city, we can make that more effective. Great, thank you. Any other points to come in on that one before we move out to the? I'd like to have 2 or 3 more needs, gaps, wants before we move over to the offers. I'm sure some of you are kind of sitting on something but not quite sure whether to say it or not. Well, I really hope you feel that you can. In the chat room, we see there's some responses to what Michelle and Karen have been saying there. So there's a great offer from Liz there to pick up on that with you, Karen, which is great to see. Anyone else want to offer something before, or offer a need, a gap, or a want before I move on?
So, sorry, me again. With Cast Iron, we've been doing Friday night interviews, which I think is up on the Culture in Your City website. But if there are any artists or makers or creatives in the meeting right now that would like to be interviewed. It's kind of a Skype call that we video and then we put out on our social media. You know, that helps anyone in terms of marketing what you're doing at the moment, if you're doing anything at all, with no pressure that you would have to be at the moment. We're quite happy to interview people, so do get in touch if there's anything that we can help with in terms of promoting the work that you're doing as artists. So, yeah.
Thank you, Michelle.
That's cast iron. I'll stop commenting on the notes. I'm taking over. So, but I popped. Oh, it's also, sorry, because I'm ironclad as well. So if you email Michelle at ironcladcreative.org, which is in the notes, I'll pass you back to my other company. So yeah, just give me an email.
Thank you very much. So we heard earlier the offer from Fabrica, from the Dome and Festival, two organisations that probably represent some of the kind of the largest creative sort of teams in the city, of whom the majority are currently furloughed, and that was offered a couple of times in terms of access to the expertise or specialisms from those furloughed staff whilst they aren't able to work for those organisations. I'm interested to kind of get a sense from the group. Would anybody take them up on that offer, or does anyone, or are there barriers to taking them up on that offer? Do any of you feel that maybe you would explore some time with an expert fundraiser or some technical staff, or somebody involved in marketing and communications to get some insight into how that might help your project? Or do people feel that that isn't something you'd readily be able to do?
Do I put my hand up? Oh, hi Richard. Can I come in on that one?
Of course you can.
Yeah, I'm putting together a project because I'm the Southeast champion for Lived Experience Network, which is kind of the parallel organisation with Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance. And I'm putting together a project which I would like to be multimedia, maybe visual arts and dance, or visual arts and theatre. My background is in theatre as well as visual arts. But I'm putting it together in terms of capturing lived experience, the use of the arts in isolation when you've been a person completely living on your own, because I am actually one of those people as well. And I want to explore the reintegration into society and the concept of touch and all of those kind of things. And I'm going to talk about it we're having a Lens meeting tomorrow, but I've never written any kind of bid for funding in my life. I'm an independent freelancer. And I would really appreciate some help in knowing how to put that together and what information I need to kind of like cinch the deal. That's what I would like help with.
Great.
Yeah.
Very clear. Thank you very much, Vicky.
Good. Thanks for saying.
Hopefully in a moment we can find somebody either in this group or elsewhere that can help you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So before I go to the offers and we build on what we've already heard, anybody else want to come in?
Yeah, I'd like to add to my list, if that's okay, seeing as everyone's here. There's a couple of things really. So generally, so I'm a bit of a kind of outsider artist really, and one of the things that I'm kind of stuck on is like business planning. So I was doing this, had this, two major projects, had this one with a very clear kind of 5-year plan, totally gone to pot, and another thing that's developing. So I'm kind of a bit stuck on this whole, how do I write my business plan? How do I kind of do this in an age of utter uncertainty? So I don't know if there's anything like that. The other thing everyone keeps telling me about, kind of, getting your social media presence, which I kind of really struggle with, but I've got this massive archive of like films, audio, photographs, huge amounts of material, and I just have no idea where to start with it. It just seems such a massive thing that you have to do all the time. So yeah, a bit of a steer on that might be really handy as well. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. No, that again, very clear, very specific. That's great. Jeremy has put in the chat a link to the Business Hothouse, which is I think a relatively new business support program that's led by Chichester University. And that, I think a lot of that's funded through the EU, and there's some very specific support with certainly with things like business planning and marketing, comm strategy, that sort of stuff. It's very bespoke, one-to-one. There's a lot of support there, and it's funded. So that's a very good link to follow, and I think that covers all of the kind of coastal capital area. I know that the coastal capital LEP are also, there's some funded time available in terms of business support. We've been offering some one-to-one surgeries, which I think some of you have tapped into, which is great. Obviously, that's just a sort of initial way to kind of think about planning. I know it does, more depth is needed for some, but there are a lot of these business support initiatives available at the moment, which many I'm involved in, and I hear time and time and again the kind of the statement that the arts and culture are very able to or welcome to tap into it, but often don't, and often feel that it's not for them. And I think mostly that's a problem in the way they're marketed, but it's also a confidence thing often from this sector to ask for that help. So do try and use that, use those support services that are available there, and there's some good endorsement from people in the chat there that it has helped them. So that's great. In terms of the fundraising, we will be doing, and I'll put details of this at the end of this call, but we are doing a webinar on Friday at 2 o'clock, which will be quite an in-depth look at fundraising in a pandemic. We've got 4 local and national experts really drilling down into structuring bids, identifying the right bids, looking at the language, looking at putting a kind of a proposition together, thinking about the kind of competition that there is for funding at the moment, the difference between emergency and kind of long-term funding, and we'll be covering all sorts of things from grants, foundations, trusts to crowdfunding and all sorts. So I do recommend everybody signs up for that. That's free. That's Friday at 2 o'clock. We'll put the details at the end. Good. Okay. So I think we'll now move on to, apologies if there's lots of background noise from me, it's just started raining. I'm in my conservatory, so it might be a bit loud. Do we have some ideas then for other specific offers, things to share? Where can people find support? Now, we've heard quite a few examples, which has been great, but is there anything that's missing? Is there anything that people in the room that haven't yet spoken could offer or support people with, and would like to speak to the room about that? Andrew Abava.
I'll just unmute myself. Hello, everybody. I'm well, in my normal life, I'm a business growth specialist with Action Coach, and now I'm a Survive and Thrive specialist. And people thinking, okay, I'm going to charge you, thousands of pounds for a couple of minutes, and you walk away not a lot. At the moment, what I do, I offer free strategy sessions, about 90 minutes, to all businesses. And also I do free stuff, free webinars, workshops and so on online, depending what people want to know. So that's an offer. I do free stuff at the moment because in recognition of the circumstances we're in. Why do I do that? 2 reasons. One is Action Coach has a policy of offering free stuff at the moment as part of the principle of abundance. That's what we do. And secondly, of course, in time, that might lead to business later. So that's an offer. And I'm willing to talk to anyone about that. And this is for, I see you as businesses, not as, in fact, creative things. You're very much a business who needs to make money somehow. That's how I work. And so that's an offer. It's just initially happy to have a free strategy session, see where you want to go, what you want to do, and then see what matches up with what's on offer in terms of all the other stuff that I do. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. That's great. Again, very clear and a very generous offer there. Thank you. Nina from National Trust, can I bring you in?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for bringing me on to your call today. Just a very simple offer. I'm currently furloughed from the National Trust, where I'm a regional marketing consultant for the Kent and East Sussex area. I live in Brighton, Hove. I'm an artist. I'm a graduate from the Brighton University many decades ago. Really would love to be more involved in our local area, the creative industries, whichever they fall into, whichever section they fall into. I wouldn't be asking for any money. I'm certainly furloughed for the rest of this month and into July. They've just confirmed today. and it just gives me that chance to help anybody that might find it useful. So Michelle, I think you were asking about social media. Really happy to talk to you, sort of see if I can start to rationalize some of that content for you. But yeah, really as a sounding board, I'm working with a Surrey-based caring charity at the moment, but they're in Surrey, and it would be fantastic for me to work and make some connections with people in the Brighton and Hove area. So I see a couple of people have contacted already. Very happy to help. I would caveat, I have an 8-year-old son who's also very creative, but obviously he does take up some of my time at the moment with homeschooling. So I will do what I can, and happy to help where I can and offer any advice and support. Okay.
Thank you, Nina. That's fantastic. I thought for a moment you were going to offer out your 8-year-old son. Might have some.
Well, he's done a puppet show already, and you know, you name it. So you never know. Maybe when he's a little bit older.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think Michael had his hand up, so I'm going to bring in Michael and then Sam Hawkins after that.
Thanks, Richard. Much appreciated. I just wanted to put in a word for the large number of community associations around Brighton and Hove that have a lot of members that, you know, seek to keep each other in touch with what's happening, and annually put on little events, everything from level best down on the Brighton level to Brunswick Square to Palmyra. You know, people that that generates not only community spirit but also money that they can then plough back into their communities and entertain us tremendously. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Michael. If you've got any links to share on the chat room there, any particular places to signpost people to, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, not many of them are that organised. There are, you really have to sort of work on a micro level to actually attend a lot of their meetings, and I'm always impressed by the resiliency that they manage to bring together and, you know, help us to stay in touch with the places that we live.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, maybe some signposting at least to, or just naming some of those communities that could be published on the Culture in Our City website, just so that people could then follow that up would be great if that's at all doable. Thank you.
Sure, I'll be happy to talk to you later.
Thank you very much, Michael. Sam, can I bring you in now?
Yeah, hello everybody. I found everything so far really useful, so thanks very much for chucking some information my way. In terms of offer, I'm very much sitting, so I work for Creative and Cultural Skills, which does a lot of work around skills development, volunteering, employment law, stuff like that. And although not an enormous help immediately, we are very interested in terms of what Andrew was saying about what the stimulus is when it comes back, and particularly around skills. So we'd be very interested in talking to anybody as things return around. We're potentially expecting there to be stimulus around young people getting back into work, etc., and how we could work to kind of capitalise that, but also bearing in mind that there's going to be a very different kind of landscape around existing staff and how we can do good work there. So that's kind of my offer, and I'm particularly interested to hear about the EPIC group and things like that emerging, and how things could be done collaboratively to make a bit more of a long-term impact in terms of skills and training in the sector.
Thank you, Sam. Absolutely. The skills story at the moment, we're at great risk of lots of brilliant work being undone, I think, very quickly as organisations understandably are protecting their existing staff and struggle to find the room to bring in perhaps new trainees or apprentices or those on sort of industry placements. Certainly in my experience, I know that that's a big struggle for businesses to comprehend when or how that might happen. Colleges and universities also being hit very hard financially, yet it'll be the young people and also obviously older people looking to change careers and upskill and rethink their careers that will be most affected by this unless we work in a joined up way to try and protect those opportunities as much as we can. I know that your organisation is doing a lot of that, Sam, so thank you very much. So anybody else like to come in with an offer or a share or an opportunity? Some great stuff going on in the chat there. Jeremy's put a few more links to specific business support. Helen, who's had to duck out from the old market, has said they're still working on their sort of support offer and strategy, but watch this space and she'll make sure that this group gets connected to that, which is brilliant. And Michelle has put her creative catch-up coffee mornings, weekly Thursdays, 9:30 for artists and creatives who want to touch base with fellow like-minded people, which is obviously brilliant. We've got about 10 minutes left, so before we come to a close and look at some other opportunities, Lawrence, I'd like to bring you in, please.
Sorry, just meeting. Hello, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces and some unfamiliar. My name is Lawrence Hill. I'm a curator and creative producer specialising around digital arts. I'm formerly director of Brighton Digital Festival. Since the beginning of the furlough, I've been working with individual artists, supporting them in different ways, really. I just put out a call sort of towards the beginning of March saying, if you've got a project you need fresh eyes or a critical friend or you're looking for funding, that kind of thing. And that's been really interesting. And I've worked with people across Europe and from all sorts of different practices. And one of the things that's become quite apparent is people that are suddenly wanting to find ways to put their work online in a more creative way than just, sticking it online, basically, if that makes sense. So I'm really interested in carrying on doing that sort of work and supporting individual artists. And it would be useful to kind of tap into to networks. And Liz, for example, if you have people that come to Fabrica who are looking for support around digital work particularly, then I'm available and up for doing it. That's it.
Thank you, Lawrence. That's great, and I think that that will be very valuable to many artists, visual artists, digital artists, as you mentioned there. Whilst I give us a little pause while other people who think they might want to put their hands up do so, I'll mention a network that we've been sort of refreshing, relaunching, something called the Possibility Club, which is kind of cross-sector online space for people who want to test ideas out. So things that might not be fully formed, might be works in progress, might be a project, might be a business idea, might be some just things that are being tested, but a safe space, often confidential space to do that, but also to find people who aren't necessarily from the same bubble of thought, a diversity of thinking and perspectives and experiences. So I recommend anybody come and join us there. That's at thepossibilityclub.org, absolutely free to join. And there's a kind of a good and growing community of people there, and lots of sharing of interesting articles and things to read, things to watch, interesting TED Talks, stuff like that. And it's just nice to connect with people through that. So by all means do have a look at that. Okay, anybody else, would you like to either follow on from a point or a comment that's been made, or maybe a question that you want to put there in terms of expanding something we've already talked about, or a new offer or a share or a recommendation of somewhere to go? I'm going to take that as that people feel fulfilled and that some good learning and sharing has happened, which is a great thing. So we'll start to bring it to a close then. I've been really encouraged by all the things that you've been talking about. I think there's been a range there. I think some of the asks have been really clear. Fundraising, business planning, social media marketing, connecting to different communities to test things out, access to space, design, and it seems like the offers have been in line with that. And it's great to see on the chat there people already swapping email addresses and booking opportunities to meet up after this. So even in just a small group, that would be great. Liz, great suggestion there. If anyone hasn't spoken, or even if you have, put a couple of lines in the chat bar of what you're offering, and in a way that we can make sure we get that right, get the wording right, and get the details right. And what we will do is collate all of that together, share that around. So there's a summary of the offers and the asks. We won't share your contact details unless you put them up there and want us to. We'll invite people to get in touch, and we'll broker that behind the scenes if you'd rather that. We will put this recording up as well, so there'll be people who aren't here this afternoon that may look at this and then want to find out how they can contact you. But otherwise, some really rich and useful things there, and it's a start. And I think the appetite for this sort of connecting, this sort of open conversation seems to be one for the long term, and I'm certainly keen to be involved in that if we can keep that going and join it up with other forums that are doing that as well. I did mention the fundraising webinar not next week, on Friday, 2 days time, 2 o'clock, fundraising in a pandemic. As I said, we've got a range of experts there to give some really clear information, tips, guidance, case studies, bits and things they've worked on in the last few weeks and months, where people have had to completely rethink the way that they approach funders. We've also got funding people there from funding bodies who are currently processing applications that can give some insight into the kind of stuff that's standing out, and the kind of direction of travel for some of the big national trusts and foundations. What kind of things are they thinking about behind the scenes in terms of what they might fund in order for a recovery? So there'll be some really useful stuff there. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do. We're hoping to live stream it on Facebook as well, and to publish a recording of that. So if you can't make the time, make sure you find and dig out the recording, which we will make available through cultureinourcity.com. I think we've mentioned that site a few times. And I won't apologise for that. Keep checking that out and look at that site. So either put your couple of lines in the chat room, or email it to us at ideas@alwayspossible.co.uk, and we'll make sure that we get all that collated. But otherwise, unless anyone's got any other business or anything else burning that you'd like to say, we'll start to bring this to a close. Michael said, can I keep you all in touch with future events? Absolutely. So if you've got your email address through this, we'll make sure you know about any that we're doing as always possible. There'll be many other events as well, I'm sure, such as the What's Next and others that all will be published via the cultureinourcity.com site. Yeah, now that if you've been here, you'll be bombarded with information about the events coming up. Don't worry about that. Okay. Thank you all very much, and a big thank you specifically to the Creative Industries Commission and Brighton Hove City Council for helping to enable this to happen. Big thank you to Liz and to Dom, to Andrew, to Branwen for leading us at the start with some offers and suggestions. And thank you very much to everybody for coming along. I know we did that poll at the beginning, and some of you eagle-eyed would have realised I've not returned to that because It didn't work. We had a technical malfunction, and it showed us that none of you gave any votes on anything, which I know isn't true. So we'll brush that aside and chalk that up to a Zoom failure. But next time we'll have figured that out. So somewhat ready, says Dom. Thank you, Dom. So that's our baseline data that we'll work on. Good. All right. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you all very soon.